On 1988, 28th April, at about 1 p.m., Aloha Airlines Flight 243 was getting ready to take off from Hilo, Hawaii to Honolulu, the capital of the state. It was a typical day in Hawaii. The sun was shining and people were excited about their vacation. Hawaii is a beautiful place with stunning beaches, lush mountains, and warm weather. Many travelers were looking forward to exploring the islands. This particular flight was short, lasting only about 35 minutes. Most passengers were already on board, eager to get to their destination. Aloha Airlines was known for its friendly service and was a popular choice for travelers moving between the Hawaiian Islands. The plane had already completed 8 flights earlier that day, so everything seemed routine. It was just another day in the skies above Hawaii. As the passengers settled into their seats, they might not have known that something was not quite right. Just before takeoff, one passenger noticed a tiny crack on the outside of the plane, where 2 metal sheets were riveted together. At the time, it seemed like a small issue. The passenger thought to herself, "This is a reliable airline. They must have checked everything." She brushed it off, assuming the airline's maintenance team had it covered. After all, planes go through extensive checks, and she felt safe flying with a well-known airline. At 1:25 p.m., the plane took off from Hilo Airport. The flight attendants began their usual routine, pushing drink trolleys down the aisles and offering refreshments. The passengers were still buckled in, as the plane had not yet reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet. Everything felt normal, just like any other flight, but that feeling of normalcy would soon vanish. About 20 minutes into the flight, as the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, a loud bang erupted through the cabin. It was a heart-stopping sound that shattered the calm of the flight. Passengers looked around in confusion and horror. Suddenly, a massive section of the airplane's roof, about the size of a small room, was gone. They were now exposed to the open sky. This was not just an ordinary problem. The sudden loss of cabin pressure caused immediate panic. Loose items, bags, and papers were sucked out of the aircraft. Passengers were terrified, gasping for air as the air pressure dropped dramatically. At high altitudes, the air is too thin for humans to breathe normally, which is why planes have pressurized cabins. When the pressurization system fails, oxygen masks are supposed to drop down for passengers to use, but this time, the oxygen system failed too. The explosion had damaged the system, and no masks were coming down. Passengers were now struggling to breathe at 24,000 feet, where the air was dangerously thin. Inside the cabin, a brave flight attendant named Michelle Honda was near row 15 when the chaos began. She immediately tried to reach the cockpit using the intercom, but there was no response. Another flight attendant, C.B. Lansing, had been serving drinks near row 5 when the blast hit. Tragically, she was sucked out of the plane instantly. A third flight attendant, Jane Satotomita, was thrown to the floor near the front of the plane, badly injured by flying debris. Michelle struggled to find help and move through the cabin, crawling on the floor, asking passengers one chilling question: "Does anyone know how to fly a plane?" The desperation in her voice only heightened the terror among the passengers. What had happened to the pilots? Were they still alive? Were they in control of the situation? Panic spread quickly among everyone on board. The temperature at that altitude was a freezing -45 degrees Celsius, and with the plane's roof gone, passengers were exposed to the brutal cold and roaring wind that rushed through the cabin at speeds nearing 500 kilometers per hour. Many passengers were wearing light clothing, shorts and t-shirts, typical beach wear for a Hawaiian vacation. They were not prepared for the extreme cold or the howling winds. Their bodies began to shake uncontrollably, and some passengers started to lose consciousness, slipping into a dangerous state called hypoxia, where the brain does not get enough oxygen. Despite the horrific scene in the passenger cabin, there was still hope. Up front, in the cockpit, Captain Robert Schornsteimer and First Officer Mimi Tompkins were both alive and fighting to save the plane. When the explosion happened, they felt the impact and turned to see the devastation. The roof above the passengers had been torn away, and debris was flying everywhere. The cockpit door had blown off, but fortunately, their oxygen masks were working. Both pilots knew they had only moments to act. They immediately began an emergency descent, trying to bring the plane to a lower altitude where the passengers could breathe without needing oxygen masks. At a terrifying speed of 500 kilometers per hour, the plane began dropping at a rate of 4,100 feet per minute. Every second counted. However, they faced another terrifying problem. The structure of the plane had been severely compromised. The floor was the only thing holding the cockpit and passenger cabin together. If they continued flying like this for too long, or if they descended too quickly, the entire plane could break apart midair. The situation was beyond critical. First Officer Tompkins radioed air traffic control to report their emergency. Given the state of the plane, they were instructed to divert to Maui, a closer airport, instead of continuing to Honolulu. The crew was racing against time, but their expert handling of the plane prevented a complete disaster, at least for the moment. 3 minutes after the explosion, the aircraft descended to 14,000 feet. The thinner air at higher altitudes had been the most immediate danger, but now most passengers could breathe normally again. They were still exposed to the freezing temperatures and howling winds, but at least they weren't suffocating anymore. The situation remained dire, but a small bit of hope returned to the terrified passengers. As the plane continued its rapid descent, the pilots realized they had another major obstacle. Halakala, a massive 10,000-foot mountain, stood between them and Maui Airport. With the plane already in such a weakened state, flying over or around the mountain would be a tricky and dangerous maneuver. Carefully, Captain Schornsteimer reduced the plane's speed to just 170 knots. Any slower, and the plane would become hard to control. With steady hands and nerves of steel, they guided the plane between the islands, avoiding the towering mountain and aiming straight for the runway. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers could finally see that the pilots were in control, and the plane was making its way toward the ground. There was a sense of fragile relief, but fear still lingered. What if something else went wrong? Would they make it through the landing? The situation was still touch and go. As they approached the runway, First Officer Tompkins deployed the landing gear. The main gear, the wheels at the rear of the plane, locked into place successfully, but the nose gear, the crucial front wheels, weren't working. Without the nose gear, landing would be much more dangerous. The pilots had to make a tough decision. Could they attempt a belly landing, where the plane's body would make contact with the runway? Normally, a belly landing would be a last resort, but given the extensive damage to the plane, it was a huge risk. If the plane hit the ground too hard, it could break apart completely. Even worse, a rupture in the fuel tank could ignite a fire or even cause an explosion. As the aircraft descended lower and the runway came into view, passengers braced for impact. Some began praying, while others clutched the hands of loved ones, fearing they might never see each other again. The plane started to sway from side to side as it came down. The pilots quickly realized that the left engine had failed. They tried to restart it manually, but their attempts were unsuccessful. Emergency services were already on standby on the runway. Firefighters, ambulances, and evacuation teams were prepared for the worst, trying to minimize any possible damage. At 1:56 p.m., the pilots informed the Maui Tower that they needed all the assistance the airport could provide.
Descending out of 11,000, request clearance into Maui for landing. Request the emergency equipment.
On the runway, a person watching the plane through binoculars noticed something important. The nose gear had successfully deployed, meaning the plane wouldn't have to make a belly landing. They informed the pilots, which eased at least one of their many concerns. At 1:58 p.m., exactly 13 minutes and 42 seconds after the explosion, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 touched down on the runway. In addition to using the brakes, the pilots activated the thrust reverser on the reining engine to help slow the plane down. Gradually, the aircraft came to a safe stop. The emergency crews on the runway breathed a sigh of relief as they rushed to the plane. Passengers were evacuated through the emergency slides, and there is real video footage showing them sliding down, clearly shaken but alive. As they made their way to safety, many passengers applauded the captain and thanked him for saving their lives. Although most passengers survived, many suffered severe injuries. An 84-year-old woman sitting in seat 5A had a skull fracture and was the most critically injured. The passenger in seat 6A had a broken arm, while those in seats 4A and 4F were also seriously hurt. Essentially, the passengers sitting between rows 4 and 7 were the most severely affected because the roof over this section had completely blown off. Passengers from rows 8 to 21, on the other hand, fared much better, with minor injuries reported. Tragically, flight attendant C.B. Lansing was not found. She had been thrown from the plane when the roof was torn away. Her body was never discovered, leaving her family in grief. C.B. was well loved by her co-workers and had been a dedicated flight attendant for Aloha Airlines for many years. Many passengers reported that she had shown exceptional care and kindness throughout the flight, making her loss even more painful. In the days and weeks that followed the incident, investigations began. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, looked into what went wrong. They discovered that the aircraft, a Boeing 737, had been flying for over 19 years. Over time, wear and tear from pressurization and depressurization had weakened its structure. Cracks had developed in the metal, which went unnoticed during routine inspections. The exact location of the failure was found to be in the area above row 5, where C.B. Lansing had been serving drinks when the tragedy struck. The NTSB reported that the plane had not been properly inspected for metal fatigue, which led to the catastrophic failure. This accident led to significant changes in airline regulations. Airlines across the country tightened their safety protocols. Older aircraft underwent more thorough inspections, and maintenance teams were required to check for signs of metal fatigue regularly. Despite the tragic loss of CB Lansing, the crew and pilots of Aloha Airlines Flight 243 were hailed as heroes. Captain Schornsteimer and First Officer Tompkins received numerous awards and commendations for their bravery and skill in handling the crisis. They managed to save 59 lives that day and brought the plane down safely against all odds. The story of Flight 243 is often remembered as the miracle flight without a roof. It is a reminder of the importance of aviation safety and the lives that can be saved through quick thinking and skilled decision-making. Passengers who survived that day shared their stories, and many went on to become advocates for aviation safety. They wanted to ensure that no one would ever have to experience a similar tragedy again. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 stands as a crucial event in aviation history. It taught everyone in the airline industry the importance of maintenance and inspections, leading to significant improvements in airline safety standards. Passengers everywhere can feel more confident knowing that safety is a top priority for airlines. In the end, the incredible survival of most passengers aboard Flight 243 serves as a testament to the dedication of those in the aviation industry, who work tirelessly to keep us safe while we travel. The legacy of that fateful flight continues to influence how airlines operate today, ensuring that such a tragedy will not happen again. Stories like this remind us how far aviation has come, and the future looks even more exciting. Meanwhile, NASA is working on something that could change air travel forever: the X-59, a supersonic jet that can fly faster than the speed of sound without the loud sonic boom. I've explained this entire process in detail in the next video. So what do you think about this amazing plane? Let us know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future updates. See you next time. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and keep growing.